Well, so for anybody that's watching, my name is Duane Fitzhugh. I live here in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and I am with Nancy Drew, expert extraordinaire, Jenn
Mm.
Fisher. Welcome, Jenn.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule that I'm absolutely sure you have to speak with us about your experiences with Nancy Drew and stuff. I'll be honest, I have not interviewed somebody for over 30 years when I used to work in the news, so I'm a little rusty.
Oh, you're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Um, so I remember, for me, we had a station. I lived in a really small town, and I remember we had a stationery store. And the stationery store had a row of books of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys books up on a thing that you could see from the street. And my earliest recollection was my brother looking for a Hardy Boys book, and I remember driving by and him going in and then coming out and saying, "Oh, they don't have whatever volume that he was looking for." And I said, "Well, what about all those yellow ones up there?" And he's like, "Oh, there's something else." So that's my earliest recollection. I don't know how old I was at the time. Probably under 10 because I know the dates in my books are dated before we moved, and we moved when I was 10. So, but what about you? What is in something really early recollection that you have about Nancy Drew?
I don't have a specific book necessarily that I remember reading. For me, I just remember the experience and that I loved the books. I read them a lot in my school library. So, one of my earliest recollections of reading them is just going to the school library and checking them out. And when we would have programs in the library, they would be in this big open space. And like on three sides were shelves, and they had the Nancy Drews in those. I always sat by the Nancy Drew books and probably paid more attention to them than what they were talking to us about at the library during school programs. But I loved them. And my mom was an avid reader. So we would go to the bookstores like the old Walden books and places like that. And I remember buying some of them there. So one time, even I was buying a whole stack of books, and there was this elderly man checking out, and he had some books, and he turned and saw all the books I was getting, and he was so excited to see me reading that he asked my mom if he could buy me a bookmark.
Oh,
And
that's
so they used to have the little stand with all the little bookmarks with like Garfield and other characters on them. And so I think I picked out a Garfield bookmark. And so he got that for me. That was really sweet. I remember that. But those are some of my earliest memories.
very cool. We actually
Yeah.
had an old like junk store in town, and the guy would always have books in there. And so before I really became a Nancy Drew collector, which has really only been in the past year or so, I still had all of my original ones, but I had some of
Mm,
original text versions, not the revised text. And I didn't know that there were two different versions until
mm.
later when I was like, oh, why is the cover on this one different than the cover on that one? And I remember two that I had, The Mystery of the Ivory Charm and The Secret of the Old Album. I had the old versions of. So, of course, now I have both, of course.
Mhm.
So a lot of people will not know because I didn't know that Carolyn Keene was not a real person. And I'm sure there's somebody out there going, what? Not a real person?
Right, right.
Um, so a lot of people, didn't know this, that the initial author of the Nancy Drew books was a journalist by the name of Mildred Wirt, later Benson, who wrote 23, if I'm correct, out of the first 30 Nancy Drew books. And so what wondering from you is, what is it about her writing style that you think that really brought life to Nancy?
I think she was obviously a great writer. All of her books and series are really good overall. I think, she was right at that age. She was 23, 24 when she was writing, like around 24 when she was writing these books at the beginning. And she had just come out of college, and she was also getting her master's and had done that. And so she had, been at college. She'd had some little adventures outside of her small town that she grew up in. And she was always incredibly brave and bold and very stubborn and very, intelligent as a person. And so I think a lot of those qualities ended up getting imparted into the character of Nancy Drew. It was kind of her chance to start a fresh series. She had been writing Ruth Fielding already for Edward Stratemeyer, and this was her chance to sort of start something from the beginning. And I think she just kind of poured her personality in some ways into Nancy Drew. And that, of course, helped make them very popular sellers. Not to mention all the other people involved, in producing these books that all combined to make them, phenomenal. But a little bit of herself ended up in that character, or quite a bit actually. But
I read, and I think it was on your website, that when the original textbooks were revised in the 60s, that she wasn't particularly fond of the revised text because she said something like they took the spice out of it or something like that.
yeah, that was a famous quote of hers, that she felt like, she knew she was a good writer, and they had cut down a lot of what she had written. There are paragraphs in some places, whole sentences taken from the original into the revised, but a lot of it was chopped out. The descriptive elements, the melodrama, some of the suspense, chopped down 5 chapters down to a lot less pages. And it just kind of made them very choppy and fast paced, and you kind of miss that, extra oomph that she put into it with the original versions. And so I think, for her, she didn't like seeing all of that redone into something she considered a little more inferior as it read.
And
So,
we're all protective of our work, I think.
right, right.
When the editor starts taking the red pen to something, I
Hmm.
think we sometimes maybe take a little offense at it to some extent, unless you
Hmm.
really have a thick skin and don't subscribe to that theory. But now,
Yeah.
if I'm correct, you had a chance to meet Mildred Ward Benson. Am I
Hmm.
correct?
Yes,
A
yes.
little bit about
So,
I'm dying to know.
it all kind of came about, short story long. We had a discussion group online that we had formed. It was like an email list server type thing way back in the late 90s and then early 2000s, when we were all kind of hanging out online in the rudimentary stages of the internet. There'd been some message boards. Anyhow, we started this discussion group. We called ourselves Nancy Drew Sleuths, and several people joined, and then it kind of grew from there. But we were just sort of hanging out, collecting the books, discussing them, and that sort of thing. But we had a member from the Toledo area. His name was Rick, and he joined our discussion group, and he was talking about Millie. Now, I had known by this time, that she was still alive and she was still a journalist in Toledo. I never had a thought in my mind, though, I should go meet her. But Rick's like, you really ought to come meet her. And so, I said something to my mom. And so at this time, I guess I was in my mid 20s, mid to late 20s. And I said something to my mom, and she said, "Oh yeah, someday we'll go. We'll try to go." I'm like, "Mom, you don't understand." She's like 95 at the time. She's 95 years old. So we ended up, Rick kind of arranged for whoever wanted to come, and it was like 12 of us that met up there, and we got to meet her at the Toledo Blade. They had opened up a conference room and had her down there and had all of us kind of around the table with her. And she signed some books and talked to us. But the day before, Rick took myself and my mom up to the Toledo Blade to her desk area. And we sat with her a little bit. And then she sent my mom and Rick off so she could just talk to me, because she wanted to interview me for her column. She was going to base it on our visit to meet her. And so she wanted to interview me and just didn't want anybody else around. So, anyhow,
But
I'm sitting there talking to her. And yeah, that was great. I mean, it was so neat to meet her. I was, of course, very respectful. She had lived so many years and had been such a diehard worker. I mean, her work was her life. And she was very professional. She was very intelligent, very with it. At that age, she was still, churning out copy for the newspaper for a column. And yeah, so I interviewed her for something I was writing. And so it was just really neat to meet her. She signed a couple of my books that I had with me that day, including my first printing of Secret of the Old Clock book.
oh wow,
So that was
you
really
keep
neat
that
to
in a
get
safe
her.
somewhere.
Yes. So yeah, so that was a real treat to get her to sign that, and get to talk to her.
And you're writing a book about her, right?
Yes. Yes, and it's dragged, but there's a lot of drama about that. There's a lot of people that have made it hard for me to get information, strangely,
Hmm.
in this oh so helpful collecting world we live in. There's been some roadblocks and little detours I've had to make along the way, kind of like Nancy. She's trying to solve a mystery, and suddenly a roadblock or a detour or something happens. But I started out back then thinking about it, And, there's a lot of places to go gather research that were available at that time. There's more now, but I would time something with a trip somewhere or another convention we would have, and I'd get a little research done. So I just kind of slowly started gathering research over the years. And now I'm at the point where I'm still actually gathering some research, and there's some research that strangely is still not accessible. It's a mystery, but trying to get at that, and that would be really helpful for this. But I'm starting to write and get it all together, and so I'm excited about getting it finished finally now
Oh,
that
that's
I've got just about almost all the research that I need. But
excellent.
there's a little more out there I still need.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of research, pardon me. So it's my understanding that, well, I'll back up for just anybody that doesn't know. So when Edward Stratmeyer, or the Stratmeyer Syndicate that you mentioned earlier, they were a book
Mhm.
packaging firm. And so they hired
Mhm.
ghostwriters to write the many, many series that they produced. And then the books were published by mostly by Grosset and Dunlap, with whom they had a contract. And then Stradmeyer's syndicate passed on to his daughters when he died in maybe the late mid 30s, around right around 1930, right? And then
Mhm.
later, that the syndicate was sold to Grosset and Dunlap. And when Grosset and Dunlap bought the company, they donated all of the records from Stratmeyer's syndicate to the New York Public Library. And you've seen them, is that correct?
Right, I have. It was actually Simon and Schuster. Grosset does reprint all the original classic
Yeah,
hardcovers, but
that's right.
Simon is the one that kind of got the legal, they kind
Right.
of won the lawsuit, and
My
then they
bad.
end up getting,
Yep.
no, no, that's fine.
Got to be
There's
accurate.
so much stuff about that that's just kind of convoluted, but it's quite a history that can fill volumes and take up many, many interviews. But I have seen the records over a period of years. I've made quite a few trips to the New York Public Library, and I haven't quite been through all the boxes yet. There's 300 and some odd boxes. I think it's like 365, three something, 385. I've been through a lot of them, but not all. And some of them don't really pertain to what I'm doing. Like they're related to other series, maybe Tom Swift or Hardy Boys, and that's not really where I'm interested in, but all the Nancy Drew related and Mildred Wirt Benson related and other, stuff that I've been really interested in. I've pretty much been through most of it, other than some stuff on microfilm. Now the microfilm is always tedious to go through. That's the worst. So I always put that off. So I need to make a few more visits to go through some of the microfilm, but yeah, it's been fascinating to see everything, just to see a little piece of history in front of you from all this time when they were creating these books. It's really fascinating. You can go down a lot of rabbit holes in all of that research that's there. There's just volumes of it. Like one box could take half a day to go through if it's really info dense or you're trying to get photos or take tedious notes. And it's, yeah, that you get quite an experience when you go there to the archive. For anybody that wants to ever check it out, I would recommend it. Just a couple boxes just to dive in a little bit to the history is pretty fascinating.
It's almost sort of like being a spy.
Kind
Oh,
of. I mean,
the
like
Nancy Drew
you're playing
mystery.
Nancy Drew, you're playing detective, you're going back through all of this, and you're finding things that you had no clue about, or
Yeah,
some little piece of the puzzle you've been looking for that would explain, like, what is this that you didn't know about before? Why was this done this way or something? There's not always answers for everything. It appears there is some stuff that's not there, whether they lost documents at some point in the history of the company, whether it's the family might have something or someone, there's are some gaps in there, but it's pretty well overall complete for the most part.
yeah. When I saw them, I went for a completely different reason. I knew that they existed. I had read. There's a book you're probably familiar with it, of course. Nancy Drew, The Women Who Created Her by Melanie.
Yes, yes,
And
it's a
that's what
good
got
book.
me interested. And so I
Okay.
went, and the reason I went is because I'm an English teacher, and so I wanted to see, because it's rare that you get to see public a company's records that lasted that long. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see examples of business correspondence and how
Mm-hmm.
business correspondence had changed from like the late 1890s through 1970s when the company was sold. And yeah, it was neat to uncover. I'm like, oh, here's a check sent to somebody for this book, and here's the outline
Mm-hmm.
this book, and I
Mm-hmm.
have a copy of the letter where Mildred sent to Edna Squire, um, Edward Steinmeier's daughter when she and her sister ran the company, saying, I guess Edna had asked her to start writing Nancy again, and it was after Walter Carrick had written about 401.
Right.
He was requesting that they send her some copies of the other books so she could kind of like catch up to where Nancy was, sort of thing. And you mentioned something earlier about convention. So I know you are the organizer of the annual Nancy Drew conventions, and since I've never been, I would love for you to tell me all about
Okay.
what goes down at a Nancy Drew convention. Are there
Sure.
cosplayers there?
Are there what?
Cosplayers,
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand you.
cosplayers.
Oh, cosplayers. Oh, yeah, yeah. We'll have parties or mystery dinners and stuff like that. And people will come kind of dressed sort of in maybe as a character or just period kind of clothing. Some just dress up, with fun accessories or whatever. But we do have some people do the cosplay, which is fun to see. And so our convention started kind of with that one in Toledo I was talking about with you a little while ago. We basically, we went there. We didn't consider ourselves having a convention. We were just a gathering of people meeting Millie. But then everybody wanted to get together the next year. So, we picked a second place to all meet up. And then it just went from there to where we got more formally organized and we started kind of following in Nancy's footsteps by going to places where like a book was actually set in real life. We didn't exactly do that at first, our first several years. We kind of were visiting the history with Millie, and then Millie's home in Iowa. We went to the university there, and then the third year we were in New York City in New Jersey for Stratemeyer Syndicate One. But then by the fourth time we did this, the fourth year in 2004, we were in New Orleans, and so we were using the haunted showboat and kind of following in Nancy's footsteps for that. And that kind of became our thing. I think from that point forward, for the most part, we will go somewhere where a book is set, unless there's another reason for us to be somewhere or an anniversary or somebody that's tying us into Nancy Drew, and that's why we're there. So that sort of became our thing. When I was there with Millie doing the little interview by myself with her, and she was interviewing me for her column. She, our discussion group, I was called the discussion group moderator. And she's 95. She's not on the internet. She's not on any of these groups. She doesn't have any idea about what all this is about. And she thinks it sounds funny. She's having a hard time writing discussion group moderator. So she's the one that coined me the president of the Nancy Drews. And I was just like, no, 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 I don't know. You don't need to call me that. I'm just a moderator. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, you can be the president. And that's how this happened. They just sort of threw it on me and I kind of took it and ran with it. But yeah, so we kind of more organized as an organization a little bit more formally. And then we started having all these conventions. And this year is our 25th year. So we're doing them for a long time.
And T Toledo this year as well for the 95th anniversary. Is that right?
Right. We're going to do a little conference in April at the library in Toledo where my collection is. And it'll be like a short conference. Then we're having our regular, like, normal style convention in the fall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And that'll be in October.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because that was my next question. So anybody who stops in at the public library in Toledo will notice that is an entire room devoted to Nancy Drew, correct? And
Yes.
you at some point donated your entire collection to
Hmm.
the public library to set up this permanent, I guess it's a permanent exhibition.
Right.
A little bit about that, how that came about.
So I had been to Toledo over the years a few times, doing research. We had different events that we held at the library related to Nancy Drew and the history and the anniversaries of stuff. And so I knew the people at the library and I had been quite a few times there. And it's just a phenomenal, beautiful downtown library. The architecture, all of the art, the murals, the frescoes, everything that's in this beautiful architecture. And you get to the children's section on the second floor. And it was just an amazing, I've never seen a children's library like that before. It's very interactive. They have like half a car, a boat, an aquarium. They've got this giant book scene that you can step into. They've got areas where kids can go under like little loopy walls, like with arches, and you can kind of go around in areas. It's very interactive. They had this giant diorama of Nancy from the Tandy Secret of the Old Clock coming off the end of a bookshelf. And so it was just a beautiful children's library. And of course, it had all the history with Nancy Drew there. Millie wrote some of the Nancy Drew books in Toledo. She wrote 17 through 25 and number 30 there, as well as lots of other books from different series. And so, anyhow, I had kind of, over the years, collectors have discussed the prospect of what do you want to do with your collection someday? Kind of that sort of chit chat. And, we'd written about it before in our zine, The Sleuth. Different people have, discussed donating their collection someday. Some people don't really, it's not really on their radar to think about it that way, because it's the big thing to think about. And the bigger collection you have, the more likely you might be able to keep it together as a cohesive whole and have it somewhere. It's not easy to do that apparently. I didn't necessarily think about it that way, but I had seen this giant stretch of wall on this one area of the children's library with nothing there. And I kind of thought in my mind, I think this was back around 2015 when we had a big event there. And I thought, they could put shelves all along this wall and fit my collection in there. Hey, maybe someday that might be something neat for the collection. So I mentioned something to one of the women I knew there. And, I just said, do you think the library would be interested in having my collection someday? And of course, I intended it to be long way down the road. But, and they said, oh, yeah, we'd definitely be interested. And that kind of left it at that. We didn't really discuss it any further. Well, 2019 comes around, and starting at the end of 2018, the library downtown in Toledo was going under a massive renovation, like a multi-million dollar renovation of this library. I mean, it still looks very similar to how it always looked. They didn't really mess with any of the historic aspects of it or the architecture, but they enhanced areas and added things and just made it even more phenomenal. The children's area now is just even more amazing, but they had a space they could carve out for my collection, which had been two old offices and storage areas that you couldn't get into from inside the children's area except through a certain access area. And I don't think it had been used in a long time. Anyhow, it's beautiful space. It's got lots of the old wood and moldings and the features in the old window that were there decades ago. I mean, they've added modern carpet, but it looks kind of vintagey, tweedy. And, they have all this beautiful woodwork and like a fireplace with a mantle, and it's just beautiful. And so they had this space. So they contacted me and said, would you want to donate your collection now? Because we can carve a space and we can fit it in and do this right. And so then I had to kind of make that decision. Do I want to do this now or wait till I'm in my 80s and retire, fully retired? And, obviously the collection had been wonderful to have. I had so many things. It was hard to store because I ran out of space, to store everything effectively. I had a lot of historic items that needed probably better archiving, and not that many people got to see it here at my house. So those were factors that made me think about how it could serve a bigger purpose and a better use being there than in my home. Now, there's a lot of collectors that probably thought I was crazy to do that because they can't picture themselves doing that with their own collection. But
Uh-huh.
for me, I think it became about the greater good in that it's going to serve a lot of people. It's going to inspire kids to maybe want to read these books. It's going to inspire people to learn more about all the different books and series you can collect, all the spin-offs, all the collectible items, and maybe inspire people to collect and get into that aspect of it. And then of course researchers and scholars can use the collection to learn more about the history behind Nancy Drew and Millie and all the people involved. And so, because of that, I felt, even though it was bittersweet, I felt really good about it having a nice home and where it could be better preserved and protected. And so,
Hard sometimes, right?
right. And, I do miss it. Although you can see behind me, I have recollected quite a bit. I kept some books, like I kept some childhood books that meant a lot to me. I had a lot of duplicates because I collected a lot of different formats of each book. And then I kept some of my signed books and art, as you can see on the wall. I kept that for now. But I donated over 5,000 items and I keep collecting for it because I donated it so early. There's still things out there, even though I have pretty much everything, most things. There are some scarce or rare items or items that just come up that nobody even knew about. They just suddenly pop up because not everything in the New York Public Library discusses all the little promotions or advertising things that they did back then. So you don't necessarily know it exists till it just suddenly ends up on eBay or something like that. And you're like, oh, I didn't know about that. And so, anyhow, so I'm still collecting for it, um, proudly collecting for it to get it as complete as possible. There have been some people that have donated things to the collection that I didn't have, some original cover art by a couple of collectors. There's another collector who loans his paintings, Mike Gowitz from the groups. He loans his paintings to the library to display, including some of his tandies he's had
Mhm.
there. There's going to be one in April, The Secret of the Old Attic. So that's kind of how all that came about. It was just a nice opportunity for me to do something really good for the community, and so I did it, and I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I love your collection there behind you. I would assume that you'd have a lot of ephemera. So
Mhm.
what if you had to name something, if you could, what's probably the most prized possession that you have
I
outside
would
of your
say,
first
yeah,
edition of The Secret of the Old Clock?
yeah, I would say, I have since acquired, the first 7 books signed in first printings with original dust jackets by Mildred. I had a couple, but then there was a collector that was downsizing and deciding to part with some that she had got signed back in the day, the heyday of the Nancy Drew collecting. And so I was able to acquire first printings with her signature, um, from this woman, to add to what I had. So I'd say those 7 books with her signature in the early first format with the blank papers and no silhouette on the books and everything. That's probably my most prized, other than some of my cover art, like the Nappy Hidden Staircase or Witch Tree or some of the other art that I have.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because I love the paintings. So is I see the top one, is it the hidden staircase, right? And the
Mhm.
bottom is
Right. The
which
witch tree
symbol?
symbol.
Yeah.
Mhm. The witch tree
We're a
symbol.
strange group. We can tell by the cover art what the book.
Right. Right.
So I know this is a crazy question because it's like asking a parent what their favorite child is, but if you had to name a
Mhm.
favorite book, what would it be? And a favorite cover art, what would it be?
It's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I think my top 2 are The Hidden Staircase and The Secret in the Old Attic,
Mhm.
mainly because they're very suspenseful, gothic style mysteries. You've got the spooky house, you've got the secret passageways, and other things going on at the house that are kind of spooky. Like, those are definitely my top 2. And then for cover art, I would say The Secret in the Old Attic, the Tandy cover,
Mhm.
and also, I love this hidden staircase behind me. That's what I grew up reading, was this revised version with this art. So I grew up with that, and that's sort of, something I always pictured for Nancy Drew, was that style of her, because that's what I read in the very end of the 70s and the 80s, was that nappy kind of Titian-haired sleuth. So that to me is a childhood favorite. So
Yeah, for me, I'm like color focused. So oddly enough, one of the books that I like to cover the most is The Mysterious Mannequin because of that purple bluish
right.
cover. I really like that. And then I also like ones where Nancy is more full on rather than kind of off to the side. So
Hmm.
like, Clue in the Whistling Bagpipes is good for me. And the
Hmm.
Spider Sapphire because like sapphire blue is my favorite color. So um,
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, no, those are very bold covers of hers and the colors. I agree. Mysterious Mannequin, all the purple. I didn't hear you say Crooked Banister with the Pepto Bismol pink
I
background
hate it. Absolutely hate it.
and the robot on the cover.
Yep, not my favorite.
Mm,
Not my favorite.
right.
Jen, I also wanted to ask you about your own book that you already have published, and I've seen this, and I have a copy of it. It's called Clues for Real Life. Is that correct? Is that what it's
Right.
titled?
Right.
Who's
Clues
for
for Real Life, the classic wit and wisdom of Nancy Drew.
Life?
That was an interesting book. It was a project that a company that was licensing Nancy Drew to do this book came into play, and it was Meredith Books. And they're mostly known for a lot of their magazines that they put out. Like, they do a lot of magazine subscriptions, like Better Homes and Gardens. I think at one time they were doing something with Martha Stewart, but they do a lot of magazines and cookbooks and things like that. So this was different. They were kind of experimenting with gifty books. They had put one out on Kermit the Frog, and they wanted to do one on Nancy Drew. And so it was coming out, around the time of the Emma Roberts movie, which was 2007. And so I had a very brief window, and they brought me in because I knew a lot about Nancy Drew, and they needed somebody to compile this book for them that knew a lot and could do it quickly. So the licensing agents for Simon and Schuster contacted me and asked if I would be interested in being the one to compile the book. So, of course, I said yes. But I had a very short window of time. They had a basic outline for each chapter, and they wanted me to make quotes and do fun little things. Like, there was quizzes in it. You've probably seen it. It's got
Mhm,
fun little
mhm.
quizzes for each different chapter topic, or little activity things, and a glossary of fun terms and all this stuff. And it's got like a little history section at the beginning that has an overview of the history, a brief overview. And yeah, there was a chapter more on sleuthing tips and tricks, but because Penny Warner's book, the Nancy Drew Handbook, was coming out, they felt like that was an overlap, and they didn't allow that particular chapter, which I thought was bizarre, but fine. That was one of the better chapters, I thought. But anyhow, I did not make it into the book, strangely. But no, it was fun to do, and so it was supposed to be kind of like advice from Nancy. So I suppose I could sort of be like I was playing Carolyn Keene, but not exactly, because they didn't put Carolyn Keene on there. But at first, I was going to be not credited with doing it. Sort of like I was writer for hire, kind of like a ghostwriter for this book. But because of what Mildred and other people went through, and I wanted a credit for this. So I said, listen, I want a credit on the copyright page. So they do have me credited as compiling it. Anyhow, I worked with an editor there at Meredith Books that kind of oversaw my copy and, edited things here and there and put it together, and their graphic design department. And that's how it came about. The weirdest thing, though, was that in the bookstores like Barnes and Noble, they were someone in corporate of Meredith Books who clearly did not exactly understand what they were doing, put it in the self-help section, designated it for self-help. So when I went to Barnes and Noble to find it, I couldn't find it anywhere. I looked in the kids' books, I looked in the gift books, up by the registers, everywhere. Couldn't find it. And I finally asked, and like, oh, it's the self-help section. I thought, are you kidding me? So people hadn't been finding it. So a lot of people have been ordering it online. But yeah, I was like telling everybody, no, you're going to find it in the self. I don't know if I would want that to be a self-help book exactly. It's kind of more like a gifty
Learn how to be a sleuth.
nostalgia kind of book. I mean, there are quotes that give sort of fun tongue-in-cheek advice, but I don't know if I would consider that self-help, but that was funny. That was funny, but it was a lot of fun to do it.
So I guess I've got really one last question for you. You're
Okay.
a collector and you go into a bookstore and you see a book that has the price sticker on the back. You leave the price sticker on, or you take the price sticker off?
Now, it depends on the price sticker. If it's from the store I'm buying it from, I will try to kick it off. If it's an original price sticker that like the publisher, whoever put those little gold foil price stickers you find on a lot of the older
Mm-hmm.
books, I will leave those on because I think they're kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, Jen, I really appreciate your taking
Mhm.
the time out. I hope everybody here at the library will watch this and learn some things that they didn't know about Nancy Drew before, and join us in celebrating this 95th year of Nancy Drew. Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.